Welcome all. We are thrilled to have you here with us for a fireside conversation with Michael Fassnacht, a leader in so many respects, including a distinguished instructor at the University of Chicago for our program Chicago Leadership Circle, which we run in partnership with Crain's Business. I am Seth Green, and on an afternoon like this one, I'm especially grateful to say that I'm the Dean of the Graham School at the University of Chicago. And let me welcome you virtually to our gorgeous campus where big ideas are born that shape the world. And I want to just say how grateful we are to be in partnership with Crain's Chicago Business. It is an extraordinary journalistic institution that helps our business community to better understand the world and helps our entire community to look at the future of economic and community development. And we are so thrilled to be able to bring Chicago business leaders together to look from both a journalism lens and an academic lens at the big topics of the future. And that is through the Chicago Leadership Circle, which supports executives in better understanding, shaping, and engaging with the region's future. And that is why we are here, because Michael has been an outstanding instructor and leader for us of that program. And I wanted to just briefly describe the Leadership Circle because it will come up tangentially in a number of points today as we talk with Michael about the future of our region. So the Chicago Leadership Circle has three purposes. We want to inspire executives to understand and confront the big issues facing our economy and our social and community context. We want to investigate the potential approaches and solutions that can help our region to thrive. And we want to connect journalists at Crain's and faculty with the next generation of leaders in our city. And so what we do in order to accomplish that mission is we bring three lenses on the biggest issues facing the future of Chicago through a cohort-based model. We bring an academic lens, so we have faculty who are looking at these issues from a global perspective. So for example, crime is obviously a big issue for Chicago, and we've thankfully made progress, but we have further to go on public safety. What are not only the data-driven approaches here in Chicago, but what's happening across cities around the world? How can Crain's journalists look at that issue and all of the different impacts, both from a challenge and opportunity perspective? And then who are the people in business and in the civic and social sectors that are moving the needle, and how do we learn from them? And it's that threefold set of lenses on each topic that the future of Chicago really depends on that allows this cohort of extraordinary leaders to come together and design futures where they can build their business and enterprise in a way that also is building the future of our region. And so what we hope to be the outcomes, and we've seen this in the first two cohorts, is a deeper understanding among cohort members of economic and social issues affecting Chicago's future, meaningful relationships across the business and civic community, a vision that is shared for how we move forward economic and community development, and a roadmap for simultaneously advancing the aims of the enterprises and the city as a whole. And I'll just say we are so grateful to the incredible leaders, 20 extraordinary people who were part of the cohort that just completed last month, and so excited about the next cohort of this program. And my colleague Conway will put in the chat momentarily more information for those of you who decide you may want to consider being part of this leadership development program in the upcoming academic year. But the reason you are all here is because you want to learn from the distinguished instructor who weaves together that program's curriculum, and that is Michael Fassnacht. And Michael is a seasoned business executive and has more than 30 years of experience in just about every possible aspect of business and civic life. He currently serves alongside being a distinguished instructor here and being a contributor to Crain's Chicago Business as Chief Growth Officer and President of Chicagoland for Clayco, one of America's largest fully integrated design and engineering real estate development firms. Prior to that, he brilliantly led World Business Chicago and was the city's chief marketing officer. And he has continued, in my view, in that role even after formally having the title. I can't get out of a conversation with Michael without hearing a pro-Chicago lens and why the city just gets better and better. And finally, he got into this whole world of marketing during his time leading for 10 years, CEO and president of FCB, one of the city's oldest and most successful advertising agencies, and has a long and storied career in advertising that brought him to that presidency. And so, with that, I've only named a fraction of your titles, Michael, because you are a Renaissance man who has been in many different parts of our civic life. I want to start actually with a question about you, which is that in so many ways, you're not just a distinguished instructor and senior advisor to this program. You're a role model. You've really been committed to being a business leader that thinks pro-Chicago and thinks about win-wins for your company and firm and for the city's future. Just to lay the table for the rest of our discussion, can you offer a brief snapshot, the like 3-minute version of your story, and in particular, how you got so passionate about Chicago's future and then decided to come to World Business Chicago when this love affair between you and the city really took its full story on.
So first of all, thank you, Seth, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for spending your Friday 1 hour, hopefully having some lunch with us here. And I'm glad we're recording this conversation so I can play it to my children after such a beautiful introduction. Maybe once they believe I'll do something meaningful in life. So thank you. So if I look at my professional life, I love to think about chapters. And I think I'm right now on my 6th chapter of my professional book. I started, a lot of people don't know, as a missionary for the Lutheran Church in Africa for a couple of years before college. So my first chapter, a lot of experience, mostly in Cameroon, but also South Africa. I learned a lot about how some challenged countries survive, how people work hard there. So that was an amazing chapter. The second chapter was in the corporate world. I worked at Lufthansa, one of the best airlines in the world, in Frankfurt, in the headquarters, and I had the fortune to run their frequent flyer program for a couple of years globally. But I married an American, so she was a professor at Penn State. I was living in Germany, and we thought if you start a family, it might be useful to live together. So we moved together to San Francisco, started a family, and I started a company. So at the same time while we started the family with 2 young children, I learned like a couple of months after I moved to this country, a marketing tech firm in Silicon Valley. Quite a journey for 6 years, and then was fortunate enough to be able to sell to Oracle. And one of my biggest clients was a big agency leader out of Chicago, Howard Draft, who some of you still might know, which then led to my 3rd chapter, which moving to Chicago in 2006, first as the global head of strategy for Foot Garden Building, and then becoming their CEO for over 10 years here in Chicago. Then late 2019, I decided after working for over 10 years with all this creative brilliance, I might need a break. Took a little bit of break and then joined very early 2020 Mayor Lightfoot's administration, my 4th chapter. First as the chief marketing officer, and then very shortly afterwards as the CEO of World Business Chicago, which is the economic development organization. Got to know the city much better. And when Mayor Johnson won in 2013, I stayed on for a little bit, but left then World Business Chicago early 2014, and then joined my current chapter, Clayco, in the real estate world. So multiple chapters, different sectors, not a linear journey. I think if we look at the common theme, it's about, I was always curious about learning something new. And whenever I got too comfortable on my current role, I decided to leave and did something new, something very uncomfortable.
Well, that is a great way to learn. We believe here at the university that discomfort is the entry point to transformative learning. And I think you're role modeling that through the lifelong learning journey that you've gone through in your career, Michael. And I want to now come to what you've learned across all these chapters, which is that cross-sector partnership matters. And that is the premise of Chicago Leadership Circle. And we're going to talk a lot about the issues facing Chicago, how cross-sector partnership can be a part of the solution. And so I'm curious for you to just talk a little bit more at the start about what do you see as the consequential issues confronting our region's economic and community development? And then we'll jump into some of the ways in which your learning about cross-sector has insight for how we might handle them. But let's start with the challenges and opportunities. If you were to say big picture, from all your different vantage points, what are the biggest issues facing Chicago?
And allow me just to double click on the cross-sector work, because I
Yeah,
believe we cannot in Chicago solve any of our big challenges and problems without understanding and connecting three worlds or universes with all the different language. First
yeah,
is the world of business, corporations, people who are professionals. Second, the civic world, elected officials, government entities. And third, the nonprofit philanthropic sector. I believe we can only solve any of our big challenge when all three worlds connect, talk with each other, understand each other, and ultimately work together to address some of the issues.
yeah,
If you look at the biggest issue, I believe they're probably threefold right now. There are many, but I really like to focus on three right now. One is inclusive economic development. If we don't grow our economy across all 77 neighborhoods and across the region, we cannot address and solve any of our big issues. We cannot stay or become even a more attractive global city. If you look at the disparities across our city, we have an unemployment rate of 2% in Lincoln Park and over 20% in Inglewood. Young African men on the south side have an average unemployment of mid-30s. That is not long-term a sustainable situation to really stay a global attractive city and to grow further. So that's number one, I think, inclusive economic development. Second, which especially lately I become very, very passionate about, not just because I work in a real estate company, it is housing. We
yeah,
don't have enough sufficient housing. We don't build enough. We don't approve enough. We take too much time. And if you look at, and Crain does a phenomenal job on reporting on the data. Right now, Chicago is one of the fastest growing rent market in the country. And I can predict the next 3 to 5 years, this will not change, which might be good if you own a big rental property, but it's not good for the majority of Chicagoans. So we
yeah,
need to build more this year, next year, and the following year. We only develop be delivering 1,000 housing units is not enough. Last sector, economic development, housing is quality of life. I think we made tremendous progress on public safety, but overall, we need to continue to make sure Chicago is an amazing city across all neighborhoods where people want to live, want to move to, have a great quality of life.
Well, so Michael, can we look at each of those issues a
Sure.
little further with you, thinking about that cross-sector lens and where you see opportunities? And let me just name what's so interesting about those three is if you look at the exit polls from the primary that just took place in New York, and this is not a statement of, necessarily that they're the right answers as an outcome, but if you look at the exit poll in terms of what was on people's minds when they went to the ballot box, what's interesting is New York's a very different city,
Yeah.
but you would see those three issues as the top three there too, right? In terms of feeling that the economy may be strong for some, but is really weak for others, that housing is just becoming unaffordable and unavailable, and that there are quality of life challenges coming out in many ways of those two issues at the start. And so it just strikes me as fascinating that we are talking about very different cities historically, economically, but yet there are some global factors and national factors that are probably in the ecosystem around us that are driving toward those being really important and urgent issues for cities. And let's dive into them. Let's start with inclusive economic development. I know you're a believer that we need to be both pro-business and pro-Chicago, and the two align, but you have to be intentional about how you structure economic development to make sure that you're building for win-wins. And so, in your view, how do you promote inclusive economic development? What did you learn during your time in Lightfoot's administration? Where do you see the puck moving as we look to the future?
I think this is a very important observation you're making, because if you look at the data nationwide, also in Chicago, we're probably the first generation over 100 years where the young generation does not believe they will have a better, more prosperous life than the
Right.
previous generation, their parents, which is a fundamental issue. I think that explains not solely, but primarily the results in New York. So if you look at how to attract and create economic development, I think first you have to realize we are in a global competition for three key factors for economic development: money, investments, talent, because people can decide where to live, and corporations. And all three are much more fluid and mobile than ever before in the history probably of mankind. So
Yeah.
whenever I hear people say, yeah, but people have to do this because it's Chicago, people have to move here or behave a certain way. No, the majority of companies or capital in town don't have to. They can move
Right.
tomorrow, they can invite some else. So first, I think you have to understand and embrace this reality. And then second, I think you do have to communicate that you're open for business, that you're pro growth, clearly in the community on that way. But first of all, you need to make this message because we are in competition with other cities and other countries. I think we
Yeah.
lost that narrative a little bit. And then only because if you attract people and capital and corporations, then you can as well tell them how they should be community centric, why it's beneficial for them. And I think we just lost that growth mentality. And that leads ultimately to in either stagnant population and not in the growth of population that we need. People
Yeah.
are like this fact always. We're right now roughly 2.5, 2.7, 2.75 million people living in Chicago. In our peak in the 1950s, we had 3.5 million people. We are normally a city infrastructure-wise, policy-wise, cost-wise, set up for 3.5 million. So if we don't do this, so economic growth is not just for economic growth. It is a key driver for population growth. And population growth is a key indicator for the health and the promise of any urban center.
So I buy into that wholeheartedly, and really think, from a nonprofit context, which
Yeah,
is where
you're
a
at the
lot of my
University
career
of
was.
Chicago. You better buy into that.
But we used to talk in nonprofits, no profit, no purpose, no margin, no mission, right? That even when you are aiming toward a social goal, we live in capitalism. We have to realize that we need to be pro-growth and because those are the resources on which we can achieve our social ends. So let's buy that wholeheartedly. But then the question I think comes up, okay, but how do you do that growth in a way that's inclusive? Because if you focus exclusively on growth, right, it's, well, how do we get this company here? We'll give them tons of incentives. We'll let them locate wherever they want. They may end up choosing, because of those realities that you described and because of workforce issues and other things, not to be in all 77 neighborhoods. So how do you really take that pro-growth approach and get that inclusivity activated at the same time, even though at times I think we have to acknowledge those are with trade-offs, because it is not inevitable that pro-growth is growth everywhere, as we've seen over decades.
So for me, it's just I always try to make it simple things. I think as a company person, as a business leader, to think in an inclusive, community-oriented manner, it's two things. It's the right thing morally to do, and it's beneficial for your business. Because if you look at the future of a business, you want the best talent. And nowadays, a lot of talent want to make sure that you have the right moral north star as a company leader. You want the right workforce. You want a diverse workforce because you want the best people. You need to show that you're community-oriented and inclusive to attract the best talent. So for me, it's not a trade-off. It is both. It's the right thing to do, and it's ultimately beneficial for the business. If your company is in a community that is not doing well, your company ultimately long-term will not do well. If you look at Discover Financial Service with their customer care center on the south side, it was a great thing for the company, amazing talent pool that it could tap into that it couldn't have to, but it was also the right thing to do. We always need to find these intersections. And I think companies need sometimes the nonprofit organizations and the political world to understand how to do this. But I'm much more optimistic that you can find more these places of intersectionality that helps the business and helps the communities and the city.
But part of it, to your point, is having this cross-sector conversation so that people can see these opportunities. I mean, you take Discover, and they were having trouble getting people to work at their call center. So for them, being in a place where there's higher unemployment actually can be a benefit to their business, because they're looking for talent in a time when it's scarce, and there's a place where there is talent and it's available and they can train it and it's able to be successful. So I think it's a great example of how you turn something that could be considered in one context a liability into an opportunity and use it as an opportunity for inclusive growth. So finding ways to get people into these conversations and thinking about the multiple wins. And I'll just acknowledge one of my favorite conversations in my last job. We gave our Social Innovation Award to Chobani for how they approached their intersection of these. And the person we gave it to was their chief people officer and then their CEO, Hamdi Lakaya. And one of the things he often said was that the way that they approached purpose, they were a for-profit company 100% of the time. But the way they approached purpose was that he changed the question once a month at their leadership meeting. And they would ask, instead of how can we make money, what can we do for the world? But then once they answered that question, the next question would be, could we make this thing we'd want to do for the world as profitable as our core business? And he said it wasn't that we gave up on profit. We were just as much profit oriented. But when I switched the question, we started to get different possibilities and see different possibilities. They still had to have the same profit motive, but because we asked that question, which maybe other companies weren't asking, we saw a lot more opportunities. In their case, to hire a very different labor force because they realized if they had buses and translators, they could be a place where refugees could work successfully and they could get the most loyal workforce for dairy in the world. So it's a really interesting example.
And I think if you look at this example, if you look at any other large scale or even smaller scale economic development projects, you need, again, the three worlds I talked about: business, public sector, nonprofits. If you look at 1901, United Center expansion, then in words of Michael Reinsdorf and the team can only do it because they understand how to interact with the political world. They bring the right nonprofit organizations in and community to understand how to make this an inclusive development. It's the same thing on the 78 now with the Chicago Fire Stadium or the Quantum Park on the south side. So I think we lost a little bit the understanding for people who live in the other world. And we need organizations, a program like this. One of the reasons why I joined recently the Executive Club of Chicago, I think because they're creating the platforms to help people, to listen to people who are from the other world, to learn how they think, and instead of being an opposite, to figure out how you can solve a problem together. There was always traditionally the strength of Chicago, and I think we have to get back to that. That's why this program is important, like others as well. But you cannot be, that is my fundamental belief, if you're a business leader, you cannot be a long-term successful business leader without understanding the political world, the philanthropic world, to really achieve the potential that your company and your workforce has.
Well, so let's dive into the second issue you named, Michael, housing. And it's a very difficult issue nationally as well. Obviously, we're in a moment of high interest rates. We also have a lot of additional costs for builders. You know that well, with tariffs and other things. Just give us a little bit of a construct for where we are in Chicago and then how you see moving forward on that topic as we look to the future.
I think we have to completely change our attitude in all three sectors. Because like I said before, I look, you know exactly now which housing units, apartments that be delivered in 27, because they're being construction right now. In each of the next 3 years, we're delivering only 1,000 housing units, apartment units. We need at least 5,000. I think we need to have the ambition, and this is honestly what, if you look at the New York mayoral race, they have plans, they want to build 50,000, 100,000 units in the next years. And that is, I think, the right ambition. And then you have to figure out what are the obstacles to get there. We think sometimes about the approval process. We think about NIMBYism, where there's so many hurdles to build a network. But one thing is not being understood is capital. None of these big real estate projects have been happening if you can't attract the capital. So you need to as well sell the future of Chicago and the promise of Chicago to the capital market. So I think this is a complex thing, but it starts first with, I want to build in a couple of years 10,000, 20,000 units a year. And what are the key obstacles and how do I solve it? Again, across business, the civic world, and the nonprofit. I think we're thinking small ball right now. We're focused on 30 or 40 affordable housing units. That's great. But this will not solve long-term the housing challenges we have.
Well, so final area that you mentioned, quality of life, obviously it's multifaceted. It actually involves a lot of the other areas we talk about in the program, education and transportation, and all of these pieces that make the ecosystem that either help and enable or challenge quality of life in Chicago. In the best way you can, how would you describe where we are and where we want to head, and what are the three most important ways we can try to advance quality of life here, in addition to what you've already described? Obviously, economic development and housing are two key pillars already in it.
So maybe I'll focus on three aspects of quality of life. One is public safety, which has been traditionally always number one for any voter in Chicago, also residents. I mean, I look at the public safety data probably once a day. There's some great dashboards out there that I think if you're an engaged leader, you should look at least once or twice a week. And in the last 3 years, we have seen a significant decline. We are still per capita, per resident, much higher than our peer cities, LA or New York. And we be diving deep in this leadership program in one session just about what are the root causes for that. But we made tremendous progress on the hard data, but also on the perception. So I think we're making real progress. I think Police Chief Larry Snelling is a phenomenal leader. And we bring sometimes as well kind of leaders from the police department into this program to kind of understand how they think and approach. I think second is transportation. I think we still have one of the best public transportation system in the United States, but we are falling behind if we compare ourselves with other global cities, which I think we should. We should benchmark ourselves against Paris, against London, against Shanghai. I mean, we're falling behind. We need to invest more. We have to streamline our public infrastructure system. And people here on the call who are following the debate between all the three systems, Metro, CTA, and PACE, how can you connect them more? I think this is an important conversation. And last but not least, I think arts and culture. Quality of life is a lot about you want to be, especially young professionals, they want to be part of a vibrant, energetic, cool, creative city. I think we underestimate in Chicago how arts and culture is an economy driver. I like to call it the creative economy, and we have to foster it. We have to nourish it much more. We have to highlight it much more. I think we take it for granted instead of like investing in it and celebrating it much more. These are for me the three things I would spend more on. I know we're doing this in a program to understand what does quality of life mean nowadays.
Well, so there are people on this call, I see many names that are familiar, who are exceptional business leaders, and they may be asking the question, how, right? I agree with much of what you've said. I believe that we can build a better city if we take these three goals into account, if we think in a really responsible and simultaneously accountable way about building our company. In the program, there's a session on being a business and civic leader. And I'm curious if you could just give the snapshot of your advice on how individuals can start getting involved if they're not already in the politics of the city, to really try to connect between what they're doing in their professional life with these big topics that they may care about, but not know exactly how to engage as, an individual and business leader outside right now of the political or civic life.
So I think three areas of advice. First, which is probably the most challenging for me every day, is be humble and accept that you don't understand a lot of things that are happening. I think some, especially business leaders, because they had a successful career, they think they know everything. And I think some is just take a step back and realize how complex Chicago is, how complicated the history of Chicago is. We have 77 neighborhoods that look very, very different. I think some is just take a step back and be humble, like, hey, I have a lot to learn. I have a lot to learn every single day. And I think that's would be important, because that's the only way how you can be productive kind of civic leader and business leader. Second, a simple thing is to show up. There's so many programs. I mentioned the Executive Club. I mean, there's so many programs. You guys do this. University of Chicago, Crain does a lot of events. You have to show up and introduce yourself, learn, listen. I think you have to be part of that public debate. That's so beautiful, I think, about the city of Chicago. And then third, figure out what is your passion point and how can you use your passion point either through the organization that you work through or in your private life. If you're not on one nonprofit board, you're missing out. It's not that you giving something when you're part of a nonprofit, but you're receiving. I'm on, I think, 8 now. And why do I do this? It's selfish. I learn something. I go to board meetings. I get to know new people. I learn new topics. That's the beauty. That's why you live in Chicago. That's why I don't live in the rural area where I don't meet anyone. And young people as well, when young people, I don't know, show up. Introduce yourself. Go to Seth Green, go to Jim Kirk when they're in Crain, introduce yourself and ask for advice. Be involved. That's the simple advice to some degree.
Well, so I want to investigate, Michael, a couple other topics, and we're going to come to questions in the chat that are central to CLC and that we've touched on, but I would love to get the bigger picture from you. So we talked about inclusive economic development. Yes, capital and talent and companies, they're all mobile now. And one specific way that all comes together is when we think about the jobs of the future and how vital it is in general that we are pro, growth, but in particular when we think about where the puck is headed. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what you see as the critical industries and jobs of the future for Chicago to be focused on, which we spend a whole session on, and how we bring those in. I'm thinking, tech, quantum, but obviously I want to hear your list and just how to understand those. I think for a lot of people that are outside these worlds, they're not even sure how to think about these industries and what they mean to the future of the economy. And I'm curious for your take. Obviously, it's still to be understood because they're the future, but I know you have a point of view and you've been engaged in a lot of these discussion with Intersect and other involvements that you have as a leader in our community.
So first, I think it's important that Chicago as an urban center is different than other urban centers like LA or New York. We are very diverse in the economy. None of our kind of economical sectors makes more than 14% of our GDP. So I think that's a strength because we have from real estate to manufacturing to services. We have everything here in Chicago, which is great. And I think that's the future. That's the strength of Chicago. A second is clearly innovation, technology, quantum computing, artificial intelligence. I mean, it's great. We are so blessed with the universities we have. We have 25 colleges in Chicagoland who are doing amazing world-class research. So I think anything that's on the forefront, anything that's come to technology, if it's in hard tech, if it's in AI, if it's in software, anything that's kind of future-oriented. So I'm very optimistic about that we have the right ingredients. The ingredients, the foundation of this are the universities and colleges. And we have them from Chicago State, University of Chicago, including the city colleges. Some sectors I'm very excited about is blue economy, water. I think that will be a big area for us in Chicagoland because our lake, freshwater access, I'm involved in this. I'm very bullish on this because the need is there. I still believe in batteries and EV. I'm very dismayed for what's happening on federal level. I go to China once or twice a year, and people, if they would travel, they would be blown away how advanced they are on the battery manufacturing. They're 5 to 10 years ahead of us. And I think we made progress the last couple of years. I'm concerned that we might lose this the next couple of years. This is not just about electric cars, it's about batteries. It's about energy storage, distribution. I think that's a massive sector. I think Governor is doing a great job, especially on quantum computing. Clearly, I'm personally, my old role and my current role involved in this. So I think that there's a lot of momentum. So I wouldn't say there's one area. The future of Chicago will continue to be in the diversity of our industry setup.
Final question before we turn to the questions in the chat. You have led an incredible group of 20 leaders across Chicago through this academic year curriculum where we looked at all of these issues in depth. We had people in education like Z. Scott and Juan Salgado. We had people, we were talking about crime like the Civic Committee and our crime lab leader and your incredible friends. So I'm curious, as you think about that journey that you went on with this group, you were teaching, but you were also learning. What stood out for you about the year being a part of that cohort as one of its key instructional leaders?
Let's be honest. When you, Seth, and Jim Kerr from Crain asked me to do this, I had no idea what I was signing up for. And then I realized, oh, you want me to really share some of my perspectives. But I think the beauty of this cohort was one time I was a teacher, then I was a student. A cohort member was a teacher and student. I think it was so fluid.
Yeah.
Because all of us, we had to learn from each other. Clearly, we had some structure around it. We had guest speakers and everything. But I love that it was really, it was a partnership. There was not a clear teacher and a clear student. I think we learned all so much from each other. I think there was one which I thought was really beautiful. Second was, I think, the openness of the cohorts. I think we really had a safe space, independent of your background or where you are maybe politically, you had a safe space where you could share, where you could be vulnerable, where you can learn, where you can admit you don't know something. Because Chicago is complex. Chicago is complicated. One of my favorite sections was with Alderman Andrew Vasquez, and it was just a chat with him and me, and I know Andrew pretty well. And I told the cohort, I disagree probably with Andre on every single policy issue. And Andre said that is not fully true, but we had a 1 hour conversation, an exception in today's divisive climate where we can disagree respectfully. We can learn from each other. I learned from Andre, hopefully learn something from me and the court as well. And last but not least, I think that's clearly University of Chicago and Crain. The diversity of speakers, the diversity of perspective was so enriching. So whenever a speaker came, I was excited. I became the student and then tried to kind of distill this. So I think that was the beauty and the richness of this program for me.
Wonderful. Well, I want to get to the questions that are populating the chat. And so I'm going to start with one that, hold on one second, that comes from Maury. Michael, how do we make headway on these priorities with the city's budget deficit? Or is part of this course that business will have to solve it because the city may not have the resources at this time?
Very good question. So this morning I spent 2 hours in a meeting with led by Joe Ferguson, the president of the Civic Federation, and got tutored on the city budget challenges and the complexity of that between the state, the city, CPS, and everything. So first you have to realize that we are in a serious financial challenging situation as a city. And whatever people tell you, you have to do both. You have to increase the revenue side and you have to decrease the cost. The city budget was roughly $10 billion in 2019. It was this year $17 billion. And no one can tell me that the service of the city has improved almost 2x in the last 6 years. It's impossible. So we have to do both, reduce our expenses and increase our revenue. Clearly, this is super complicated. But yes, the city can't do this alone, first of all, without the state. And we cannot save ourselves, our way out of it. We need to continue to grow. We need to grow the tax base. We need to grow population. We need to grow cooperation. Why do I like housing? Housing will ultimately drive revenue, will drive tax. So you have to do all the levers. There's not one single silver bullet. It is too complicated. But first, you have to acknowledge we have a serious financial problem, and the current status quo cannot just be continued.
Well, so Homero Perez says, Michael, bold developments like the quantum campus represent a huge opportunity to drive inclusive growth in Chicago. How do we balance expanding the tax base by attracting investment and welcoming new residents while ensuring that longtime community members truly benefit from real estate-driven economic development, not just bear its costs? I think a reference to the tax incentives that are given to these types of projects.
I think it's a very good question. If we look at the Quantum Park, there are clear requirements, even on the construction side, how much have to be minority-owned companies, local residents, their percentages, how many have to be hired, both in the construction afterwards. And I think that's fair policies. That's the right thing to do, to make sure that the residents benefit from. And it's always a balance, because if you ask them, push it too much in this direction, a company might not decide then to invest. So I think it's a balance, but it comes back again to the three worlds I talked about. You have to sit together and solve it together. So I think for me, it's a balance. But I think if you look, I think that the Wirtz and the Reinsdorf family have done a phenomenal job on that to make sure it's also beneficial for the neighborhood and around the United Center. These are examples, I think. Is it always perfect? No. But population growth is the key thing that we have to ultimately look at.
We have a question here from Tim Liston about how we attract trades, unions, construction, and other non-degreed talent, especially when housing and affordability are inhibitors. And a similar question in the chat from Wilbert Jones about elaborating more on the challenges of housing and what a breakthrough could look like. So I'll combine those into a kind of mega question about how we get the talent to build the construction industry, and then how we deliver on breakthroughs ultimately in housing and other construction related fronts.
So the first question, I think culturally, we overvalue a college degree. And I have to say this in front of someone who worked in University of Chicago. We overvalue
I agree.
And a college degree is not for everyone.
Absolutely.
And I think we have to celebrate much more people who are going to trades. You can make a great middle-class lifestyle if you work in the trade. We have to, I believe as a marketer and advertiser, you have to culturally change this perception. I think the City College is a phenomenal program to get into that middle class trade world. So I think one for me, it's just we have to change the value and how these careers are perceived. I think that the city colleges and Juan Salgado did a phenomenal job. I think it's a great pillar for the future of us. So there will be one kind of, not the full answer, one answer. I think on housing, it is partly simple. If you look at the biggest home builder in the country, most of them do not invest in Chicago. Some of you, I don't think he's on the call, Dave Doig, who's a great community developer on the south side, who's really the brain and mind behind Pullman development. I'm sitting down with him now to figure out so why don't these home builders at Alaska come to Chicago? We should sit down with them, the top 20, and say, what are the challenges you see? What do we need to change? I think you have to listen to the private sector. Doesn't mean you agree with everything on them, but you have to listen, sit down with them and figure out, why don't they invest? You have to ask some of the big developers, why are you not building right now in Chicago? What are the issues? Is it property tax? Is it unpredictability? Is it legislation? You have to be willing as elected officials to listen to the other side. Let's be clear, Chicago will not solve its challenge without the private capital and the private market. The government spend is a small fraction of our economy.
Well, so we have a follow-up question from Kenny Gross, who actually was one of the panelists in one of the sessions,
Right, man.
alongside
Thank
David
you for
Doig.
all your service, Terry, you're doing. Despite being a fan of an English average soccer team, he's a great man.
Well, now we know where the true debates lie in the cohort. Let me dig into his question. He says, as part of public safety and financial deficits looming, would you protect investments in community violence intervention? And I'll broaden that a little bit, Michael. I mean, you gave, I think, a very compelling answer that we need to look at both revenue and costs, given the ballooning of the budget over the last 6 years. But as you think about what are the criteria, what are the priorities, and CVI would fit into that broader set, but how do you think about these are the must-have investments and these are areas worthy of potentially being investigated for cuts? How do you think about that divide in terms of viewer, that strategic plan thought of, these are the things that are essential to the budget and maybe these less so, if that's a fair way to frame the question?
Well, to pinpoint closer to what Terry asked about, I don't know if everyone knows here what community violence intervention is. It's really on the ground in the community, people who are intersecting with issues that could rise up and then outright escalate. 2 steps back, we sometimes look too much to the police to solve all the violence problems. It's impossible for the Chicago Police Department to do that. They are part of the solution. I think community violence intervention is another essential pillar to do that. And as some people know here, it's a lot of privately funded right now. I think it's an essential one because longer term, you might want to balance some of the investment in the police into the CVI, especially if you look at the fact the city of Chicago spends every year between $100 and $250 million to settle lawsuits that are being arising because of police misconduct. So long-term CVI needs to be a fundamental piece of our strategy to address the safety issue. Because if we look at the reduction in safety, it was partly the police, it was partly the broader leverage of CVI. Because to be honest, the private sector has not done enough to address the unemployment and job promises and opportunities for some of the young people on the south and west side. So I think CVI is a critical part, and we all have to figure out how to best finance it between public and private.
We have another question here about what more can be done to leverage the technology and innovation at our national laboratories. So Argonne and Fermilab, which are here, which the university obviously plays a leadership role in. So we very much believe that they are vital. Can you just talk about, how you see those? I mean, it comes back to a lot of the things you mentioned, EV battery, manufacturing, quantum computing, and how we leverage that alongside incredible higher education and other resources?
I mean, I've been to both facilities, Argonne and Fermilab. If people don't know, they're one of the reasons why I'm so optimistic about the future. It's with the college systems and then Argonne and Fermilab, our 2 national labs here. I think the key thing for me is we have to bring them closer with the universities to the innovators, to the commercializations, to the entrepreneurs. We can't, yes, they're primary research. I think they want to. They want to be closer to the commercialization and to kind of the entrepreneurial and to the companies who need the technology that Argonne and Fermilab are developing. One example is yesterday was announced that Boston-based Pure Lithium company, they're building lithium batteries, is moving all the operation to Chicago. One of the key reasons, the CEO worked at Argonne Lab, got to know them, loved what the Chicago ecosystem provides, with great leadership from the governor, Intersect, and the CEO. They're moving now this amazing company into Fulton Market next to the John Zuckerberg lab. So we need to just bring them closer to the private sector. That's what I believe.
We have two questions that I think come together well. The first is, how do we encourage business leaders to start their strategies with not just include the communities most impacted by disinvestment? What will it take to make these neighborhoods the center of innovation, not the afterthought? And then another question, I would love to hear your thoughts on how we can better attract and leverage investments and development on the south and west sides of the city. Obviously, you were part of Invest, South and West in the Lightfoot administration. How do you see that ability to magnetize these areas and get them more visibly in front of business leaders as they're making decisions, and have them as a forefront opportunity rather than maybe a secondary afterthought?
So the first, let me try to answer this maybe unexpected. A lot of business leaders believe that their success, their company success, their wealth is solely driven by their brilliance and their hard work. And that is not correct. It has been co-generated by the community that the company started, by the police officer who protected them, the nurse who helped their employees be safe and healthy. So that corporate wealth creation is part of a societal context. And therefore, I do believe as a business, you have the moral obligation, because they help you to drive your personal wealth, to also be community-minded. Because if the community is not doing well, the next wealth generation will not happen, will not occur. So I think one of my job, I consider one of my mission in life, is to show business leaders, yes, you worked hard, you're probably smart, but part of your wealth creation is created by the community. So for me, it's a moral obligation. We don't talk enough about this, I believe. Second, economic development of the South and West side. I think we have a perception issue. We have to reframe the South and West side not as challenging, dangerous, disinvested places, but as neighborhoods with amazing people, amazing talent, amazing opportunity. Because while I do this moral argument on one, I will never attract a company to move there or to invest there if they don't see as well as a business opportunity. And I believe there are tremendous business opportunity, tremendous talent, tremendous energy on the South and West side. And I do believe we have to reframe that, reposition this in the minds of a lot of the business leaders who think differently about that. Because most business leaders, including myself before I joined the public life, do not go south of Roosevelt or west of Ashland.
And I mean, we have a follow-up question, so I'll just bring it to you in real time here, Michael. When talking about the South and West sides, what are your thoughts on the focal points, if you have them, in terms of how to think about, where there can be concentrated cross-sector opportunities?
I mean, there are two kind of thoughts. You have commercial corridors, you need to invest, and I think that was the Invest Southwest strategy. Second, I think you have some momentum that you have to capitalize on. I think with the Obama Center opening, I'm close. I'm one of the people who try to push to create like a Southside Museum campus. There shouldn't be just a downtown museum campus. There should be Southside Museum campus between the Obama Center, University of Chicago, DuSable Museum, MSI. They should all work together and make this one interesting, great destination for residents and tourists alike. So I think we're seeing this more and more. We're seeing it with the Pritzker Traubert Foundation, with the Chicago Prize, with investing in focal points that then can be the instigator instead for more development around that. That's what I believe.
Well, so you've made the case throughout this on the importance of a strong city ecosystem across business, civic, and nonprofit. We have an interesting question here from Eric Gastovich. Where do you see the weakest connections across those three pillars? So if you had to say, where is that cross-sector not currently helping us to move the needle? what's the issue where you see maybe the greatest opportunity and also today maybe the greatest challenge in terms of that cross-sector collaboration?
I think currently the biggest delta and gap is probably between the business community and leadership and the elected officials in the city. I think there's a big gap of and a lack of understanding and working together to really build long-term solutions. I think that is the biggest gap. You also, if you look at the history of Chicago, we also have to understand like 20, 30 years ago, these three worlds were very much in sync, which was not always good because 10 or 20 mostly white men smoking cigars at the University Club or Chicago Club made all the decisions from elected officials, business and nonprofit. This was not the right approach either. Now it's much more heterogeneous, much more diverse, which is a good thing. But I think the biggest gap right now is between, I think, the elected officials, the political world, and the business world.
We are coming to time, Michael, with regret, but I'll ask one more question here. Are there specific initiatives that you feel are under-attended and need of specific support? So if you had to say, here are a couple of focal points from an issues perspective for people to really attend to that you think are not currently getting enough attention from leaders who are on this call, what would those be?
I mean, if people follow me on LinkedIn, one passion point that is very close because of my background, my history is I think there is no honest, and that might be a controversial point here, there's no honest and respectful conversation about the rise of anti-Semitism in Chicagoland. I think this is perceived as a topic for just the Jewish community and not for non-Jewish people like me. I think this is a topic for all of us that needs to be addressed and should be discussed. And I think none of the large kind of platform organizations are doing that. And I think it's concerning how this has developed and being normalized the last couple of years. The second one, more policy-wise, I think it is housing. It is people are not earnest enough about we are in a severe housing crisis and we are not understanding the urgency of how to address this.
Well, Michael, thank you. I also just want to thank again our incredible partners in this endeavor, Crain Chicago Business. I see Jim Kirk is here, and I want to thank him personally for his extraordinary leadership of that institution and their partnership with us in this Chicago Leadership Circle. We really believe together that Chicago has its greatest days ahead of it. To your point, Michael, we were a city of 3.5 million. We need a pro-growth agenda to move us there, and we need to do it in an inclusive way that makes sure everyone benefits. And I think that what you're doing with Chicago Leadership Circle as a leader and then bringing together the best of journalism and faculty along with incredible practitioners is one piece of building this cross-sector puzzle that can move our region forward. So thank you for all of your leadership. Thanks to our incredible partners at Crain's. And we will have an information session exclusively on the program coming up that I know Conway will follow up with information on and where you can hear from cohort participants about their experience alongside going deep into the curriculum. Thank you all for your time today, and I hope everyone has a joyful and safe weekend. Thanks again.
Thank you.